Earlier you mentioned pirates and the relationship between an established media product, media experience like a film, and then bringing it into a games universe. We have that process of film adaptation from books to film, etc.
Right.
Do you think we understand it well enough as yet how to do that with games, the relationship between games and film?
Well, generally, I've done a few times. I've done a good number of what's original IP, new, never before seen ideas, and I've done a number of licensed products. Often with licensed products, what they simply do is they'll take something like, I don't want to denigrate something, so we'll just take something like a movie or a show or a cartoon character and just sort of somehow mold it into a game, replicating what happens in the movie. It's not very good. They sell, people buy them, because I love the movie with that talking fish, and here's the game with the talking fish. But people aren't going to people are not going to put up with that much longer, I think, because the quality of the game is going to rival the look of the movie. If you're looking at, say, Finding Nemo, for example, just talking about fish, or any of the computer-generated films, the quality of the animation of the game is going to rival that, so the storytelling can't simply replicate it and give people missions based on what they've already seen. It's going to be having to sort of absorb that world at its best and translate it into a new experience. And I've been lucky maybe 2 or 3 times with licensed properties to have had that experience, and also probably an equal number of times not to have had it. And in one, it was involving Disney's Aladdin, which was a completely brand new story. We know the characters. Robin Williams did the voice, and it was absolutely wonderful because it was a full-blown new adventure involving these characters. It was actually an educational game for kids, and it turned out terrific. It's really, it's one of the things I'm really proud of. Old, but good. And the Pirates game I mentioned before, which was really done at the best possible way you could do one of those things.
Excellent.
Excuse me a minute, just before you go on the shoot buttons. Thank you.
And just putting on my researcher's hat for a moment, I know in the emerging field of game studies, where there are researchers, academics, much like film studies, you developed a theorists who are really interested in the aesthetic of film, who are interested in the aesthetic of games, what it is specifically about the experience of games. For a while was shaped by a debate between those who viewed it as fundamentally important to get at what the narrative relationship with games was and how to do narrative well in games, versus another school who tends to argue that narrative is less important. Layering or imposing narrative onto games could be quite problematic and actually take away from that very unique experience of playing a game.
Right.
They've moved on a little bit from that,
Yeah.
but again, there's still this question, I think, this tension between gameplay, and I know you touched on it earlier, gameplay and narrative. I'm just wondering where you think the questions that we're still grappling with are there, and that perhaps we need to be still asking ourselves and taking seriously.
Well, I kind of think that debate, which is a very real debate and still goes on, and it has its partisans. It's sort of like Jonathan Swift. He has the people who debate the big enders and the little enders and eggs, and which is better. I think that's what it is. It's been a while since I've read it. And also, you mentioned this 2 schools of thought, to which my answer would be: there's many schools of thought, and there's many different ways to implement it. I did a book called The Greatest Games of All Time, which not only collected games, but it was a history of games. So I went back and researched what the first game was. And one of the first games was Nim, which is found carved into the pyramids in Egypt, which essentially does have a story. I mean, it's essentially a strategy game. It's a story. When you play something like Monopoly, there's a tale. It's going to be loss and greed and bankruptcy, and and the story is going to be different every time. But the essentials are going to be there. You're going to get wealthy, you're going to go bust. What's going to happen there? Chess, we need to say any more. But then you back off to something like checkers, which is wonderful. But even checkers has a hint, as being a strategy game, a hint of capturing. I've captured something. We don't know why we capture the pieces, other than it's better to capture than be captured. So I think there are, the pure gamers who say, I just want to have fun and do things. I don't care about story. But essentially, they've always been, from the dawns of time, been entwined together, and will continue to be. But what I'd say is that the type of gameplay, or the type of story you're dealing with, is going to suggest how they interact, which one, and how they interface, and how they're woven together, and how important it is. Anyone who's ever played, you know the game Jenga?
No.
There's lots of bits of wood in a nice little thing, and everyone pulls one out, and pulls one out, and
Okay,
eventually
good.
you pull one out, and the whole thing
Yeah, no, okay.
falls down. Not really much for stories. That's tower, and it's great fun. But that's one end of the spectrum that goes all the way into intense story games, whether it's murder mysteries. So I think, as I said, there's many schools of thought, and we just be aware that we should continue exploring all those avenues in terms of gameplay.
I guess the final question I'd like to pose or explore is, with games now, the idea that you're creating a rich interactive environment in which the players themselves become the storytellers. You're giving them resources or an opportunity to tell their stories. I can think of here a statement by the great game designer Will Wright, where he commented one of his aims is to give his players experience of not so much being Luke Skywalker but being George Lucas.
Right.
So I'm wondering what you think about that process.
Right. Well, the work of Will Wright obviously is brilliant, and Peter Molyneux brilliant. And it represents a certain form of game which creates almost like a tool set. Someone at this lab I've been working at recently talked about getting a box of Legos, and it wasn't the box with the how to make the X-Wing fighter. It's just a bunch of Lego pieces. Well, that essentially is a Will Wright game. There's the bunch of Lego pieces. What do you want to make out of it? And maybe there's some goals, and you get goals and points and so forth. So. And in a way, when you're doing that, you're making up your own tale. I'm producing this thing, and now it's a building, and so forth. So you do become your own storyteller. And we, from the time we sat in the sandbox, and we're digging tunnels, and we're putting soldiers in, we have the sand, we have the toy soldiers, we have shovels, certain tool set to play and make up a tale. That said, we probably went running back upstairs and opened up the comic book and reading Superman, which is very, very linear, and we just want to absorb that story world. And so, if anything, I'd like to encourage that spectrum in the game world. I think there's always going to be, those games will continue. Now, whether, as some gamers might prefer to say, will they dominate and crush every other type of game, I certainly hope not. Because if they really understand game history, that's not the world of games. That there is room and space for all these different niches of game, including at the very high end where you're going to deliver a dramatic storytelling, interactive experience. If you will, put someone in to a tremendous, emotionally powerful, gripping story where they are the actor. It's not the story they're making up, but they are the person who's going to be playing the role, as if you could be James Bond or Jack Bauer or Mickey Mouse or something.